Imagine this. You wake up in a room that looks exactly like your bedroom, but something feels off. You glance at the mirror and freeze. The reflection stares back with your face, your eyes, your features. But it's not you, not really. It blinks when you blink. It frowns when you frown. It mimics perfectly. But deep down, you know, the thing in the mirror has been acting like you for years, saying the right things, smiling at the right people, wearing the right clothes, following the right script. And you've let it. You try to speak, but your voice cracks. The reflection doesn't. It stands tall, confident, composed, polished, while you feel like a stranger in your own skin. How long has it been like this? Since that job interview where you said you were passionate about something you couldn't care less about? Since you smiled at someone who shattered you just to seem civil? Since you laughed at a joke that stabbed your dignity just to avoid being dramatic? At what point did the performance become the identity? There's a nameplate on the wall with your name on it. A perfectly written resume on the table listing all your so-called skills. A carefully curated social feed looping on a screen. Sunset photos, gym selfies, motivational quotes, vacation reels, all tagged number grateful number, blessed number living my best life. You know it's a lie, a beautiful one, but a lie nonetheless. You reach for the door, hoping to leave this unsettling room. It doesn't open, not because it's locked, but because you don't remember how to leave. You don't even know who's supposed to leave, the real you or the one you've become, and then it hits you. There are two of you, the one you are and the one you pretend to be. They coexist quietly, constantly. They eat at the same table, wear the same smile, sign the same emails, live in the same body. But they are at war, a silent war, a civil war of the soul. One side wants to scream, to quit, to destroy the masks, even if it means starting from zero. The other wants to comply, to keep smiling, to make everyone else comfortable, even if it costs your sanity. Who wins this war? And more disturbingly, have you already surrendered without even realizing it? What happens when the lie becomes more likable than the truth? When the image is more nourished than the soul? When being accepted by others feels more urgent than being honest with yourself? What if the world you built was never meant for the real you? Is that success? Or is it just survival in disguise? Do you even remember the last time you did something without trying to be seen doing it? When your choices weren't shaped by how they'd appear, but by how they'd feel? What if the person you show to the world is not just a mask, but a prison? How many dreams have you abandoned because they didn't fit the character you were playing? How many truths have you buried just to keep the script going? And when does this end? At what cost? What if the applause you've been chasing is for a role you never auditioned for? What if, when the curtain falls, there's nothing left behind it? This is not about hypocrisy. It's not about being fake. It's about survival. It's about adaptation. It's about the self, folded, edited, silenced day after day, until even you start to forget what it looked like before the pretending began. But the deeper question is not why you do it. The deeper question is this: who are you when no one is watching? And why does that version of you feel so far away? This is the war. Subtle, silent, merciless, and most never notice they're even fighting it. But once you do, once you catch that eerie glance in the mirror, once you feel the ache of pretending, you can't go back. You start seeing the masks, not just your own, but everyone's. The rehearsed laughter, the practiced vulnerability, the curated sorrow, the silent compromises. You realize we're all in rooms like this, mirror-locked, name-tagged, soul-starved. Some will decorate the prison, others will try to burn it down. But the war never sleeps. The question is not whether the war exists. It does. The question is whether you're willing to face it. And that, my friend, is where the story truly begins. You were not born pretending. You were born raw, screaming, unfiltered, real. You didn't know how to wear a mask. You didn't know what acceptable meant. You cried when you were hurt, laughed when you were happy, took up space simply because you existed. That was your original state, your truth. So what happened? Why did you stop being you? Somewhere along the timeline, the world gave you a silent command. Be what we want you to be, or suffer. The lesson wasn't spoken in words. It came in cold stares, withheld affection, failed expectations, and small punishments for honest expressions. And so, bit by bit, a new version of you was assembled, not for authenticity, but for acceptance. This was not your fault. It was a survival mechanism. Carl Jung called this constructed version the persona, a kind of psychological mask created to meet the demands of society. Not evil, not malicious, just necessary. A tool. But like any tool, it becomes dangerous when you forget you're using it and start living inside it. You became your persona, or so you thought. The real you, the self Jung spoke of, never disappeared. It just went underground, into the shadow, into the silence, waiting. But the persona thrives in the light. It performs, it adapts, it does what it must. Because from a young age you learned, truth is expensive, but pretending is rewarded. Say the right thing in school, you're praised. Wear the right clothes, you're admired. Show the right attitude at work, you're promoted. Play the game well enough, and the world will hand you certificates, applause, followers, and love. But it's love with conditions, approval with terms, belonging based on compliance. And so, without realizing it, you became an actor in a play you didn't write. You convinced yourself you were free. But the scripts were already written, by family, by culture, by media, by fear. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." What if the version of you that wants success, applause, safety, is not even you? What if your desires were installed? What if your whole idea of success is a cage with golden bars? The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with a fixed nature, but instead define ourselves through actions. But here's the haunting twist. Most people never choose their actions freely. They inherit them, imitate them. They become what others expect, not what they are. And so the self becomes buried beneath performance, not by choice but by design. Society doesn't want your full truth. It wants your function, your utility, your obedience. From the moment you enter the system, the shaping begins. Be nice, be normal. Don't be too loud, too weird, too intense. Parents, teachers, employers, even friends, they all carve at you, unintentionally, until the authentic shape is almost unrecognizable. Why? Because authenticity is dangerous. It disrupts, it offends. It doesn't fit neatly into algorithms or performance reviews or polite dinner parties. But here's the real tragedy. The war between the real and the performed self doesn't just create discomfort, it creates fracture. The inner self begins to rot in isolation, not physically, but spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured the horrors of Auschwitz, wrote that the greatest task of any human being is not to pursue pleasure, but to find meaning. But how can you find meaning when the self seeking it is artificial? There is a kind of silent despair that creeps in when the persona lives too long. You feel it when the applause fades and you feel emptier than before. You feel it in the middle of a party, surrounded by people who adore the version of you they know, but have never met your soul. The lie is not loud, it is quiet, polished, impressive, but it costs you everything. You start to laugh at jokes that make you uncomfortable. You say yes when you want to scream no. You go to events where your presence feels like self-betrayal. You buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. You even start posting your pain in aesthetically pleasing ways, just enough to seem real, but never enough to be truly vulnerable. It's not just pretending, it's performance as identity. And slowly, you forget where the mask ends and the face begins. But the unconscious never forgets. Carl Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The persona, left unchecked, becomes not just a mask, but a master. It starts making your choices, choosing your relationships, shaping your morals, determining your future. You live its life, not yours. Aldous Huxley described modern society as a place where people are not controlled by fear, but by pleasure, by distraction, by comfort, by entertainment. The self doesn't even realize it's in chains because the chains are made of dopamine. Performance is addictive. Likes, views, compliments, they become validation in place of truth. But this deception is not sustainable. Eventually, the fractures become too deep. The persona starts to crack. Anxiety seeps in. Depression emerges. Burnout, numbness. A quiet yearning for something real, something unedited, something that doesn't require an audience. This is where the inner war becomes visible. This is when people feel lost, not because they don't have direction, but because they no longer know who is walking the path. The real question is not, what do you want to become? The real question is, who were you before the world told you who to be? You see, the problem is not just pretending. The problem is forgetting that you are pretending. And when forgetting becomes your norm, authenticity becomes foreign. Honesty becomes dangerous, and truth feels like rebellion. But some part of you remembers. Somewhere beneath the performance, the filtered smiles, the perfect posts, something ancient stirs. Not a brand, not a role, but a self. Raw, powerful, waiting. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it whisper, "There is more than this." You don't wake up one day and realize you've betrayed yourself. It happens quietly, in pieces. 1,000 small moments of silence when you should have spoken. 100 fake smiles that mask the scream. A dozen opportunities you let pass because they didn't align with the character you're performing. And then, one day, you stand in a room full of people and feel completely alone. Not because no one is there, but because you are not. This is the price of the war. Not just confusion, not just sadness, but a hollowing, a slow erosion of the soul so subtle you don't even feel it until there's nothing left to hold on to. And yet, you still keep the performance going. Why? Because pretending has become easier than being. It's not your fault. Your brain is wired for it. Cognitive biases, like the confirmation bias, make sure you only see the parts of the world that validate your performance. The spotlight effect convinces you that everyone is watching your every move, judging every misstep, so you stay on script, even in moments of deep pain. And then there's imposter syndrome, the cruel irony that even your mask makes you feel like a fraud. You don't just pretend. You suffer for pretending. And then you punish yourself for not being able to stop. And society rewards this. Think about it. We applaud the ones who push through, who keep smiling no matter how broken they feel. We label people as strong for enduring toxic jobs, unhealthy relationships, suffocating environments, so long as they make it look good. We glorify curated vulnerability, where people confess only the digestible parts of their truth, just enough to seem relatable, never enough to shake the illusion. Even therapy, once a space for peeling back the mask, is now being marketed as another form of optimization. Heal so you can become more productive. Work on yourself so you can attract better things. Do you see? Even healing is being hijacked by the persona. But the most terrifying consequence of all, you stop trusting your own instincts. You feel anger, but you dismiss it. I shouldn't feel this way. You feel exhausted, but you keep going. I can't afford to rest. You feel lost, but you wear a smile. Everything's fine. You gaslight yourself into silence, and over time that silence becomes your language. Arthur Koestler once wrote, "The most persistent sound which reverberates through man's history is the beating of war drums." But the modern war drums don't echo from battlefields. They beat from within your skull, the rhythmic pounding of suppression, conformity, and performance. You are both the soldier and the battlefield. This war doesn't only destroy individuals, it corrodes societies. A society full of people pretending to be okay becomes a society addicted to surface. We build relationships based on compatibility of masks, not authenticity of souls. We vote for candidates based on charisma, not character. We hire based on likability, not integrity. We date based on aesthetics, not depth. We consume content that flatters our personas, not challenges our truths. And slowly, the culture mirrors the lie. Art becomes commercial, spirituality becomes branding, truth becomes a product. Even rebellion gets packaged and sold. We start to crave more of the illusion because reality feels numb. The more we perform, the more we need validation. The more validation we get, the more trapped we become in the version of ourselves that got it. This is the loop, and it tightens with every like, every promotion, every compliment aimed at the mask. Eventually, you start living for applause you can no longer hear, chasing dreams you no longer believe in, smiling at victories that feel like losses. And when that inner voice, the one buried deep beneath the persona, tries to whisper, "I'm still here," you drown it out with noise, work, distraction, dopamine, anything but silence. Because silence is dangerous. It threatens to expose the truth. And the truth? The truth is this: you are living someone else's life. Not entirely, not dramatically, but enough to feel the ache in your chest at night. Enough to feel a tightness in your throat when someone asks, "How are you really?" Enough to feel like something is off, even when everything looks perfect. This is the consequence of the war. Not chaos, not collapse, but quiet decay. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind that leaves no scars, but eats from the inside out. Until you forget what joy feels like without performance. Until you lose the ability to cry without shame. Until you wake up one day and realize you have spent your life building a life that your true self was never invited into. And that's the moment, the one where the pain becomes too loud to ignore, the one where you stop scrolling, stop pretending, stop running, and listen, because somewhere inside you, beneath the persona, beyond the scripts, behind the curtain, is a self that has never stopped waiting. Not for applause, not for approval, just to be seen, truly, nakedly, honestly. Seen not as what you've become, but as what you've always been. And that realization, as painful as it is the beginning of the end of the mask, the end of the lie, the end of the war, or at least the beginning of the rebellion. At first, it feels like madness. When you begin to dismantle the lie, there's no thunderclap, no grand revelation, only a whisper, a gentle unraveling. You feel it in subtle ways, in the pause before you say yes to something you don't want, in the friction between your thoughts and the words you force through a smile, in the mirror, when the reflection looks familiar, but no longer feels like home. That's when it starts. The rebellion, not against the world, not against society, against the version of yourself you never chose. But understand this. The path to your truth doesn't begin with becoming. It begins with unbecoming. Unbecoming the one who always agrees. Unbecoming the achiever, the people pleaser, the fixer, the survivor. Unbecoming the illusion of strength, perfection, likability. You don't need to become something more. You need to shed what was never yours to carry. This isn't easy. In fact, it might be the hardest thing you ever do, because breaking free from your persona feels like dying. And in a way, it is. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos is real, the dismantling is violent. But the star, your truth, is waiting behind it. You will feel fear, guilt, resistance. Your mind will scream, "What if they don't accept the real me? What if I lose everything I built? What if I have nothing left?" Let it scream, let the questions echo, and walk forward anyway. Because the only thing you'll lose is the cage. History is full of those who rebelled not by raising their fists, but by claiming their truth. People who shattered expectations and stepped out of the roles forced upon them. Søren Kierkegaard, who chose authenticity over societal respectability, even when it meant isolation and heartbreak. Frida Kahlo, who painted her pain with unflinching honesty, refusing to edit her truth for the comfort of others. Siddhartha Gautama, who abandoned privilege and comfort in search of what was real, becoming the Buddha not by adding beliefs, but by letting go of illusions. Their rebellion wasn't explosive, it was existential. They rejected the world's definition of success. They endured misunderstanding. They chose solitude over performance. And in that space, they met themselves again. So how do you begin? Not with a manifesto, not with a dramatic gesture, with one sacred question. What is the truth I've been afraid to say out loud? Sit with that, not for an hour, for days, for weeks. Let it haunt you, let it guide you. And then, start telling the truth. Not the whole truth, just one small piece at a time. Say no when you mean no. Pause before you respond automatically. Speak without curating. Cry without apologizing. Express without polishing. You will tremble. You will fear rejection. You might even lose people. But what you'll gain is yourself. This is not a transformation that happens in the spotlight. It happens in quiet rooms, in midnight journal entries, in solitary walks, in tear-soaked pillows. But with every truth you honor, the mask loosens. With every act of rebellion against your own self-betrayal, the prison weakens. You stop seeking applause. You start seeking alignment. You begin to build a life, not for the version of you the world applauded, but for the being that existed before the world taught you to perform. You will lose some things. Yes, you might lose a job that required the mask. You might lose friends who only knew your persona. You might lose status, comfort, certainty. But you'll gain something far more rare. You'll gain peace, not comfort. Peace, the kind that comes from being the same person in every room. The kind that lets you sleep without rehearsing tomorrow, the kind that silences the war between your inner and outer worlds. And here's the miracle. When you stop pretending, you stop needing to remember which version of yourself to be. You become whole, not perfect, not polished, but real. And reality, in its rawest form, is far more magnetic than any performance. You'll start attracting people who resonate with your truth, not your performance. You'll find relationships not based on roles, but on recognition. You'll stop chasing meaning and begin creating it, not through grand gestures, but through authentic being. This is the quiet revolution. It doesn't shout, it doesn't trend, but it transforms everything. When you choose authenticity over approval, you stop participating in the lie. You stop feeding the machine of image. You step out of the illusion and become dangerous, free. Because nothing threatens a performance-based world more than a soul that refuses to play its part. You won't always be understood, but you'll be known, and that is infinitely more sacred. So choose the rebellion, choose the mess, choose the questions without answers, choose the unease of honesty over the comfort of conformity, because beyond the chaos of unbecoming is the only kind of peace worth living for, the peace of being fully you. No edits, no masks, no war, just truth. There comes a moment when silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like presence, like something ancient has returned to the room, like the wind has shifted, barely noticeable, yet undeniably real. You sit in the stillness, no performance, no role, no script. And for the first time, you don't feel the urge to become anything. Because what if the whole time, while you chased, changed, adapted, improved, you were never meant to become anything at all? What if your only task was to remember? We think of selfhood as a construction project, brick by brick, effort upon effort. Build confidence, develop skills, adopt habits, forge an identity. But beneath all of it, before the world touched you with its noise and its names, you were something. Not an idea, not a story, not a collection of traits, a presence, a flame. You were. Before language, before memory, before you learned how to shrink, to please, to win, to fit, you simply existed. And that existence was enough. This is the final truth, the great remembering, the sacred return, not to who you were before the world shaped you, but to the self the world could never reach, the self that watched the performance but never joined it, the self that knew you were pretending but never judged you for it, the self that waited, with the infinite patience of the soul, for you to come back. It is not the voice in your head, it is the awareness behind the voice. It is not the character, it is the stage. You are not your persona. You are the space that holds it. You are not the noise. You are the silence underneath. You are not what you do. You are the being that moves behind the doing. This is not metaphor. It is the most intimate, immediate truth you will ever encounter. Because when all the stories fall away, when you are not the child, not the lover, not the friend, not the creator, not the wounded, not the healer, what remains? You. Not the idea of you, not the image of you. You. And this you has never been broken, has never needed fixing, has never left. It was simply buried. Under years of performance, under expectations and trauma and comparison and fear. But even buried, it never dimmed. It simply waited, like the sun behind a storm, unchanged, unchanging. Viktor Frankl once said, "Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." But what if the truest meaning is not something to find, but something to remember? And what if that remembering begins when you realize you were never the war? You were the field it was fought on. You were never lost, only distant. You were never broken, only buried. You were never disconnected, only distracted. And in that realization, something inside you shifts. You stop fighting yourself. You stop proving. You stop trying to deserve your own existence. You start breathing differently, living differently. Not louder, but deeper. You start breathing differently, living differently. Not louder, but deeper. You don't need to shout anymore, because presence whispers louder than performance ever could. This is where the war ends, not with victory, not with defeat, but with surrender. A sacred surrender to your original self, the one who never needed to impress, explain, or escape. And here's what's strange. The moment you stop pretending, the world changes. You no longer attract what resonates with your mask. You attract what honors your soul. People sense it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. The gravity of someone who knows themselves. The calm of someone who no longer seeks themselves in others. The power of someone who's come home. You become dangerous in the most beautiful way. unshakable, because nothing they can take from you was ever yours, and everything that is yours, your truth, your essence, your light, cannot be touched, not by failure, not by rejection, not even by death, because what you are is before all that. And so the final question is no longer, who am I? But rather, what has always been here, even when I forgot? That is where the journey ends, not in discovery, but in remembrance. And from that remembrance flows everything else. Integrity, not as a virtue, but as a byproduct of wholeness. Joy, not as a performance, but as the natural glow of alignment. Love, not as possession, but as recognition. Creativity, not as effort, but as overflow. You no longer try to live authentically. You simply live. Because the greatest freedom is not in being seen. It is in no longer needing to be, no longer needing to edit, to posture, to defend, to manage perception, no longer at war, no longer afraid, just here, just now, just you. And so the war ends not with a battle cry, but with a whisper, a breath, a stillness, a knowing. The world may continue to scream, to seduce you back into the performance, to offer applause for the mask. Let it. You've already won. Not because you fought harder, but because you finally stopped fighting and remembered who you were before the war began. And that was always enough.